Welcome to the call with Moms for Liberty. Today we're going to be talking to Parents Defending Education with Nicole Neily, who's been working very hard sending out documents and information on everything that affects education. But today we're talking about the changes in Title IX, which the Biden administration wants to make, changing the definition of just sex to gender identity, and what that means to our local school levels if this happens at a federal level. And Nicole, we're so grateful that you're here to explain this to us. And we could start by talking about how the changes of Title IX would affect the schools.
Sure. So Title IX, just for everybody who might not be as read into federal civil rights law as you and I are, it is actually, it's a statute that was written in 1972 as an amendment to the Education Acts. And it's only 37 words, and it prohibits discrimination in education on the basis of sex. Really simple, really basic. And so it's funny because I think 10 years ago when I was working at the Independent Women's Forum, a lot of us thought about Title IX in the context of schools getting rid of maybe a male wrestling, the boys wrestling program, because there wasn't a female wrestling program. We thought there had to be balance in that. And then during the Obama administration, it really morphed into what people called kangaroo courts on college campuses, where there were the tribunals where you could be charged for something that you didn't know about and thrown out of school without significant due process. And so what we have seen the interpretation of this federal statute expand over the years. And one thing that the Obama administration did that was really concerning was, rather than actually change the statute properly through a process called notice and comment, which is what is going on right now, where the public gets to weigh in on whether they want something changed or not. The Obama administration sent out something called Dear Colleague letters, where they were kind of threat letters, basically saying, this is our interpretation of what it is. And so if you don't define, let's say, a hostile environment as making, sexual jokes, you might be found in violation of Title IX. And they threaten schools with what's called the death penalty. And so for a university, if you're subject to that, if you're found in violation of that, you would lose access to all federal funding. And for universities in particular, that's huge, because it's not just the direct money you get, it's also student loans. And the majority of students in college obviously go through federal student loans. And so if a college were to be cut off from that, they would go out of business, they'd be dead. As a side note, that never actually ever happened. So this really was just a threat. During the Trump administration, Secretary DeVos did the whole proper process and put in place a lot of very firm guardrails, restoring due process rights to Title IX, saying you have the right to evidence that's being used against you. You have the right to cross-examine somebody who has made an accusation against you, really basic things. And what's going on right now is the Biden administration put out their notice of proposed rulemaking, where they want to change what President Trump and Secretary DeVos did, to go back to the bad old days of what was happening under the Obama administration. That being said, what is going on right now actually wants to go farther than that. So not only are they going to strip out due process protections, sacrifice the First Amendment on the altar of Title IX, but also read sexual orientation and gender ideology and gender identity into the statute. And so what that does in practice is it essentially removes the differences between men and women. If I say I'm something else, then I can use whatever facilities I want to. And so where we as parents have come into this, and Parents Defending Education primarily operates in kindergarten to 12th grade, so K to 12 as opposed to colleges, is we have 4 concerns about this. The first is fairness. Let's think about all these girls who have fought for a place on the podium over the years. Women, female swimmers, for example, who have gotten up at 4 o'clock in the morning for 10 years of their life to try and earn a scholarship. That's a real concern, because as we have seen with Leah Thomas, these women are losing out on scholarship opportunities, on NCAA championship opportunities, and they're deeply distressed by that, and rightfully so. So there's fairness concerns. There are also safety concerns. And in safety, I break it down into 2 parts. One is in the sports setting. I think about female lacrosse players versus male lacrosse players, for example. Male lacrosse players throw a ball between 85 to 95 miles an hour. They wear chest protectors, they wear helmets. Female lacrosse players on average throw a ball between 45 to 65 miles an hour. They don't wear any protection. If you have a biological male throwing a ball that hard against unprotected females, that you might kill someone. So there are real safety concerns about that. And then the other safety concern is, what happens in locker rooms, in restrooms. I live in Northern Virginia, and there have been assaults in bathrooms. There was a very famous incident in Loudoun County. These are not trivial concerns. Aside from the safety and fairness, there's also privacy concerns, the importance of protecting female-only spaces. Again, restrooms, locker rooms. We're involved in a lawsuit right now in central Iowa. And after the district passed a transgender policy where they said you can use any bathroom or locker room you want, there were girls that for the last 6 weeks of the school year didn't go to the bathroom at school, didn't change for gym class at school, because there were boys that tried to take advantage of it because they would walk in and say, I'm a girl today, and the school couldn't do anything about it. And they felt violated. They were really worried about that. And the final concern that we have with this is just parental rights. We have a right to know what is going on in our children's lives, and we have a right to make decisions about that. Be it for my child being on an overnight field trip and being placed in a room, a hotel room with someone who is biologically the opposite sex, up through how does my child learn sex ed in school, and will there be someone of the opposite sex in that classroom, so that children are not as forthcoming or asking as many questions as they want to. We need to know what's going on, and we want to advocate for our children. And what this rule does is it really cuts us out of the process. And so there's a lot of concerns, and it's really important right now that people like you and your members weigh in and submit comments to the Department of Education, as you said, by September 12th. Because the federal government is required, when they propose regulations like this, to read and acknowledge all concerns that come from all places, from nonprofits like us and like Moms for Liberty, through to average parents, average citizens, people who don't have children, to raise concerns and to respond to those and integrate that into what their final rule is. If they don't do that, if they just plow straight ahead without listening to our concerns, the rule can then be challenged under something called the Administrative Procedure Act, on grounds that it is arbitrary and capricious. Those are actually like the legal terms, that they have moved ahead hell or high water. And so that's why it's so important for people to make their voices known, because when people speak up, the government must listen.
It's interesting what you said that, because trauma is a big buzzword now. And when my daughter, she's non-speaking, was in a school restroom and some boys came in there, she was so traumatized that I had to take her to the hospital for 3 months to pull the urine out of her, because she was so traumatized she couldn't urinate anymore. So these are natural ways that children can become traumatized. And we can't just, and I think about the autism community and the special needs community, we're failing to think about a whole group of people that need just as much attention and just as much protection. So I feel like it's getting very lopsided.
Absolutely. And that's actually, we have a lawsuit going right now, as I said, in Iowa about this. And we have several special needs families that are part of our lawsuit, because they have particular concerns where their children are not able to vocalize their opposition, not able to vocalize their concerns. And the parents are worried that if they speak up and advocate for their children, or their children speak up, that they will be targeted, that they will be stigmatized, marginalized, called transphobic or bigots when they are trying to protect their children. And so it is so important that, for brave people like you to speak up and be voices for the voiceless. And so I encourage everyone to comment.
And what about the pronouns? Are we going to see, if it's discrimination, are we going to see them go into the pronouns where they're going to be asking the students to use the correct pronouns, or they get in trouble? Or how do you see that moving?
Absolutely. I think of this proposed rule as the must say they bill. You have to use someone's pronoun. If they say, you have to call me a zer, a this, a them. And so, yes, because to not use someone's pronoun under what the administration's rule would do would create what's called a hostile environment. And so it is, again, we're going back to those days when the Obama administration sacrificed the First Amendment on the altar of Title IX. You have First Amendment rights. You cannot be compelled to say things. You should not be compelled to say things. A school is not entitled to real estate in your child's mouth or your child's brain. And that is exactly what they are trying to do right now. Be it for conscience reasons, be it because, a teacher has 25 children in their classroom and can't keep everybody's constantly changing pronouns straight. There will be repercussions. There will be people punished for not using people's preferred pronouns. And again, we think that's immoral and we think it's unconstitutional.
And there was one more point, the mental health care. It's possible that the schools will then feel even more entitled to become safe places and do social, social transitioning for the gender first at school without telling the parents. Would this somehow strengthen the ability for schools to keep this secret?
Yes, we have seen from coast to coast districts that have been putting in place things called gender support plans, where they will work with the child behind a family's back and figure out, what do you want to be called at school? What pronouns do you want to use? Should we tell your parents or not? And so, as you alluded to, schools talk about social emotional learning and mental health all of the time. Yet we have our taxpayer funded schools encouraging students to lead double lives. That's horrifying. What does that do for a child's mental well-being? It's something that should deeply disturb all of us because these are very personal decisions that a parent should be read in on. It doesn't matter what the letter is next to your name. We all know that children do better and thrive when a parent is involved in their child's life. Maybe you're doing a lesson on Germany at school, and so you can watch a movie about that. You could have a German meal. We want to help. We want to support our families. And what we're seeing through these gender support plans and through the secrecy is that schools are implying to children that they're not safe at home, that you're safer at school. We'll be supportive. Your family might not. I have a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old. My children would never think that mommy doesn't love them, that they wouldn't be safe at home unless someone put that idea in their head. And again, these are public school employees that are funded by our tax dollars. And for my child to be turned against me by a teacher, by an administrator is appalling, because who will be there after my child graduates from high school when my child is crying on the bathroom floor? It will not be the superintendent or the math teacher. It is me. And they're creating these divisions between families and really putting those doubts. Children are not unsafe at home. And let's bear in mind, schools are already mandatory reporters. So if a school were to think that a family were unsafe, a child were unsafe, they should have reported that already, and not just when it's politically expedient for their, gender ideology lessons.
And there was a gentleman that I watched on YouTube who said that this could actually lead towards a movement where Child Protective Services could potentially go into the family and say, well, you're not doing the gender support plan, you're not affirming. And so this could become very serious for families.
It's more than just speculation. It's actually happening. This happened in California. I saw a presentation that the Heritage Foundation did several years ago of a mother whose child was taken away, and the child was transitioned in a foster family, and the child became suicidal. And before she killed herself, she called her mom and said, "Mom, I know you're always the only one who ever loved me." I mean, that poor mother's story is heartbreaking. And those kinds of things are taking place across the country. So parents rightfully fear the reach of these school systems because it's comply or else. And again, that's why it's so important that we speak up and we defend our children and our rights.
And everything seems to be different now because I think our parents are just thinking, well, Title IX is the girls' sports and the locker rooms and the bathrooms, but it's also everything. It's also all this gender being used at school, and it's going to make the social contagion of, picking your gender so much easier for the kids and so much more difficult for the parents to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, and we want to love our children and be supportive of our children. But at the same time, let's remember the ages that these initiatives are starting at. The Department of Education wants to start to ask children when they collect data, whether they're non-binary beginning in kindergarten. They had another proposed rule about that to change their civil rights data collection, which happens every 2 years. My kindergartner did not know if she was male, female, or non-binary. My child believes in the tooth fairy and the Easter bunny when she was 5 years old. And so again, to start to put these ideas, very sensitive ideas, into children's heads when they're innocent and they're not developmentally ready for it is questionable. And the fact that they are so determined to rip our children's innocence away and put these ideas in from a very young age is really something that should concern everybody. Because again, it's being done with our tax dollars in our name to our children without our knowledge.
And you know, these things about parents are above politics. You know, there's no left and right in a parent's love for a child. But all these things are being pushed right now by this administration so hard. It's so confusing for parents. I mean, why is there a sudden world view being pushed on all of us that's so intense that parents don't even get a say? I mean, I don't know, Susan, if you want to speak up for one moment, but we have SEL, social emotional learning, being pushed so hard, started in summer school. And none of the parents were asked anything. And then we have the pronouns and the gender and the racial things inside that, where we thought, well, it sounds great, you know, social and emotional for all the learning loss in COVID. And then we find out there's something completely different inside. And now adding this Title IX, it seems like there's a coordinated move somehow. I mean, am I being paranoid, or do you see like a move taking place? Susan, do you want to say? Susan, do you want to say something?
No, I was going to say, I was just going to echo what Cynthia was saying, that I don't think when people hear the term SEL, social emotional learning, and because I've heard it a couple times, the teachers will, what's wrong with it? We love it, you know, because they're thinking in terms of traditional definition, right? They're not aware of the move towards transformational or transformative SEL. They don't know that. You know, so we're in a position of having to convince them data collection on your children is not good. It's not a good thing. You need to opt out, right? But teachers don't know. They're just administering this stuff. So yeah, it's complicated. Yeah. So I just wondered what your views on that are. And then the other thing was, Cynthia and I were talking about this, like we're undergoing a strategic plan. So our Board of Education is going to do this new strategic plan. Interesting that we've hired NASB, the BOE has hired NASB to help them. And if you go to the NASB website, it's all this woke material. It's all equity, inclusivity, and all this stuff. Why are we going to NASB? Why do we have to do that? I just wondered if you were aware of any other states that are going through this.
No, it's making a new framework is what they told us. And we only have one Board of Education. We only have one district here. So when they do it for the whole state.
Right. No, your point about SEL is so important. And it's something that we try to tell people all the time. This is a Trojan horse to put all of these identity politics ideas into classrooms. And let's take a step back and think about the tremendous learning loss that our children have incurred during the course of COVID. I mean, schools were shut down in Northern Virginia for 18 months. And rather than addressing that learning loss, I mean, the children who have been just falling through the cracks, who just didn't show up for online school and never returned, the ones whose proficiency rates fell off the cliff, our schools have not been addressing that. They have our children for a finite period. It really is a zero-sum equation at school. You have my child for 7 hours a day. And rather than making up what they didn't learn for 2 years, you're using 3 or 4 hours a day to do the social emotional learning. To talk about, and you know, parents are fed fluffy terms like big feelings, bullying, but that's not what it is at all. I want you to actually teach my child to proficiency, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's how my child will have better self-esteem. That will improve my child's mental health when they have mastered something and they are proud of themselves. So don't just build them up without actually teaching them the underlying fundamentals, because they know it's a Potemkin village. They realize that there's no actual substance, and they feel bad about that. And to your point, Susan, about the data mining that's taking place, that's also something that's horrifying. Companies like Panorama Education that do surveys that, again, parents don't know about, the kinds of questions that are being asked of our children. In many cases, they're deeply intrusive, they're personal. Parents have a federal right to opt out of them if they're funded. Parents are often not told that they have a right to opt out. I worked in polling for a year. And so there's a thing called push polling. You can write a question in a way to get an answer you want. Do you ever feel unwelcome versus how do you feel? You can kind of guide children along a certain path. And what we're seeing with a lot of these surveys is they know where they want to get to. They want to get to a new equity plan, for example. And so let's create a survey and draft it in a way where it shows children feel isolated, alone, and hated. Okay, well, that's the justification. But once all of this data has been collected, what happens to it and where does it go? On average, 2 school districts a day in America are hacked. So all of that information is going somewhere. How will that be used against us, either by bad actors or frankly, by our school districts themselves? There were millions of dollars in that recent gun bill that were poured into student mental health interventions. Will your child be subject to a red flag law because they said, I hate Bobby today, or I'm mad at mommy? I mean, what kinds of information and how will this data be interpreted later on by people who don't know your child? I think these are all really, really valid concerns. And again, what we don't know is the really scary part, because schools are not forthcoming about this. They should be, and they are legally obligated to, but more often than not, all of this takes place behind closed doors. And so that's why we have to advocate for our children and ask these questions and file public records requests to get this and share it with each other.
And can our parents in Hawaii, I know you have a tip line on your site, is that right? Can we make tips into your site, and where would that, what's the address for that?
Yeah, our website is defendinged.org. We get tips from all 50 states, including Hawaii. And it's really important, because one thing we saw in the Virginia election last year is, you'll have media outlets, you'll have activists who say, this isn't being taught in our school, that's not being taught in our state. And it's really satisfying to be able to go back to them and say, here's 10 examples of what's happening here. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it magical unicorn theory, but you are teaching children to treat each other differently on the basis of race and on the basis of sex. And that's wrong. It's immoral. It's unconstitutional. And we won't stand for it. We deserve better, and our children deserve better. And so just to share those tips, people can say if they want to be anonymous or not, because we believe that sunshine is the best disinfectant. You'd be so surprised after we write up these tips, we pitch them out to the news media. When they get called from local news outlets or national news outlets, districts backtrack very quickly. That was a mistake. We didn't mean to have that lesson plan. We're pulling that. There's a lot of mistakes that have been caught over the past year and a half. And it really is, I think it's starting to change the incentive structure for a lot of teachers and principals, because if they think, is this going to end up on the local news tonight? It makes them think twice about certain lesson plans. And we want them to. We want them to focus back on the basics where everyone agrees. Let's teach our children to read. Let's teach them math. Let's teach them basic science. Let's not get into the ideological things that divide communities.
Well, I hope we start to go in that direction. Susan, did you have one more question? Or I know she's a specialist in the ESSER.
No, I don't think so.
We're just trying to keep track of everything. So much money is coming into every state, and so much money comes into Hawaii, and Hawaii always says yes to the money. And so they have to spend 23% on ESSER funds, on the SEL out of the emergency funding. And yet I don't think there's been any data to say that the SEL, it's so new. Where is the data that says this is the exact solution for our children's emotional loss during COVID? There's no data, and yet they're ordering more of it. They want to put it in every single classroom.
And as you said, yeah. He who pays the piper,
Nicole, it's going to be
tune,
over.
right?
It's going to be over $80-some million here in the state for SEL programs. We have no idea what they're doing. We have no idea. Where is all that money possibly going? It's really insane.
Right.
And I'm sure other states have the same.
These districts. Right. Absolutely. And the districts then get used to having that extra money. And so next year, when the ESSER money runs out, they're going to plead pauper. They're going to try and pass bond initiatives because they're used to operating at a higher baseline for, as you said, unproven programs. They are experimenting on our children because there's not data to back up the effectiveness of this. And so I don't want my child experimenting parented on. I want my child to learn, and I want my child to be safe. And frankly, on both those counts, the public school system has failed far too many children in this country for far too long.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us today. And Parents Defending Education, we're just so happy to be in the town hall with you guys and be part of what you're saying. And you give us so much hope when you put your new research up, and every time you do a news clip, we're all watching it and sharing it, and it's very important to us. The information is what's keeping us going. So thank you.
But we are proud to share a foxhole with you, because we have learned over the past 2 years that the powers that be, the ones that we thought were in charge, that had our children's best interest at heart, be it the teachers unions or the National School Board Association, they don't care about our children. They care about their money and their power. And so it comes down to us, the moms, who will fight and who will defend our children.
Yes, it does.
Yep.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
And aloha from Hawaii.
Thank you.